मॅडम अनम्यूट करून बोला आपलं झालं.
येतं ऐकायला आकाश?
हो हो.
Sorry, there was some technical issue for which it was disconnected. So we were definition portions. The first is aggrieved person. Why this definition is important? Because section 12, which is the basic section which deals with the filing of application, it opens with the word that the aggrieved person can file the application or the petition. Therefore, we should know who is an aggrieved person, or in short, who can file the petition in the court of law. As far as you advocates are concerned, it is very necessary for you to know who can be the applicant, and what should be pleaded in the petition, so that you can prove that the petitioner who has filed a petition is the aggrieved person. I have seen the petitions running into pages and pages and pages, which is not in fact necessary. See, the reliefs are just 3 or 4 which are claimed by the advocate, but the petition runs into hundreds of pages, which is in fact not at all necessary. If you will see the spirit of the act, you will come to know it very well. As per the definition 2A, aggrieved person means any woman. So important aspect is any woman. So basically the aggrieved person should be the woman. It cannot be filed by a male, but only by the female. Any woman who is or has been in a domestic relationship with the respondent and who alleges to have been subjected to any act of domestic violence by the respondent. So for understanding who is the aggrieved person or who can file the petition, the other 2-3 words which are used in the section are also important, and we should know that also. That is the woman. Firstly, that should be the woman. She should be in a domestic relationship. So we should know what is domestic relationship. And next, domestic relationship with the respondent. So who is the respondent? And she has been subjected to any act of domestic violence. So what is domestic violence? These 4 definitions or these 4 words are important in this definition, and all these words are also defined in section 2 itself. We are going to see all these words one by one for clear understanding of this aggrieved person. Just now I referred you that the aggrieved person should be any woman. Now you will ask the question that I have referred Article 14 and 15 and 21 of Indian Constitution, which deals with equality. Equality before law and equal protection of laws. So the question which may struck to the mind of few of you would be that if it speaks about the right of equality, equal protection of laws, then such protection is also needed to a male person. There may be few cases where the male person is also suffering from domestic violence at the hands of his wife. There may be cases, I am not denying it. So why those cases are not covered in this Domestic Violence Act, and why the aggrieved person shall be a woman only? That question may hit to your mind. But friends, considering the object of the act, that it is specifically meant for women, a male person cannot be the aggrieved person within the definition of section 2A of this act. This is very well discussed in few authorities also. Before that, I would tell you one interesting authority in which this question was raised, that the petition was filed by a male person and not a female. And the question was, as per Article 14 and 15, a male person can also file. That was the pleading of that person. The authority is Muhammad Zakir versus Shabana. It is decided, it is of Karnataka High Court, decided in 2018 year. That was the decision of the judge, High Court Justice, that a male is also included in the definition of aggrieved person. That was the finding. But later on, it was withdrawn by the same judge when the advocate pointed out that it would be against the spirit of Article 14 and 15, in which the state can make special laws for women and children. Though Article 14 and 15 speaks about equality, equal protection, it also gives power to the state to pass legislations, to make rules or regulations for the special protection of women and children. And this act is basically for women who are suffering from domestic violence, and therefore a male cannot be included in the definition of the term aggrieved person. So you should know that the petition can be filed only by a female. So any woman, irrespective of the age, can fit within this definition of section 2A. The next word which is used in this is domestic relationship. So the woman should be in domestic relationship with the respondent. So we will firstly see what is domestic relationship. It is also defined in section 2F of POWDV Act. Domestic relationship means a relationship between two persons who live or have at any point of time lived together in a shared household. When they are related by consanguinity, marriage, or through a relationship in the nature of marriage, adoption, or family members living together as a joint family. So in this, all types of relations are covered, marriage also, and in the nature of marriage also. We are going to see that also, what is in the nature of marriage, what is marriage, etc. But basically domestic relationship means relationship between two persons who live or have at any point of time lived together in a shared household. So it is not necessary that at the time of filing of the petition also the aggrieved person should stay or should be in a domestic relationship with the respondent or should live in the same household, because the past residence is also covered. It is not required that the present situation or presently also she is staying. The past stay is also covered within this domestic relationship. Shared household, of course, we are going to see that also, because that is important part of this act. Next is the respondent. Who can be the respondent? Here we are going to read the definition only, and after finishing this aggrieved person fully, we will deal with in detail who is the respondent, because that is also the aspect to be interpreted and to be discussed. So as per definition 2Q of POWDV Act, though the definition in the book of law is one and it is interpreted by Supreme Court, and now it should there should be some amendment, and that is Supreme Court has referred it. But now, as of now, I am reading the definition which is there at the time of passing of the act, which was there, and I'm going to read that only. So don't get confused. Respondent means any adult male person who is or has been in a domestic relationship with the aggrieved person and against whom the aggrieved person has sought any relief under this act, provided that an aggrieved wife or female living in relationship in the nature of marriage may also file a complaint against a relative of husband or male partner. So the respondent in this definition, the husband is covered, his relatives are covered, and the partner in live-in relationship is also covered. So when the aggrieved person is in a domestic relationship, means she has stayed with the respondent at any point of time, or she is presently also staying with him in the shared household, and if she suffered from domestic violence, then we can say that she is the aggrieved person and she can file an application or complaint or petition, whatever name you may, whatever word you may use, but she can claim reliefs against the respondent under this act. The word domestic violence is also important. That is defined in section 3 of POWDV Act. The definition is very exhaustive. All the things are covered in it. We cannot say that this is not a domestic violence, or all this will not be covered within it, because this is very exhaustive definition. See, the initial 2 lines of this section 3 will show you that for the purposes of this act, any act, omission, commission or conduct of the respondent shall constitute domestic violence. See, normally the act word is used, means positive assertion if something is done. But while drafting this definition, the care is taken that not only commission or not only act, but omission are also covered. Means it is the duty to do, but it is not done. That is omission. Means it is the duty of the husband, it is the duty of living partner of the male or the respondent to do a particular thing to the wife. Suppose maintenance, she should be maintained, food should be provided to her, proper shelter to be provided, care of her should be taken. So these are the duties imposed upon him. But he omits to do it. See, there is difference between commission and omission. So commission will also amount to offense, or commission would also amount to domestic violence. But omission is also covered here, which he is bound to do by law, but he is not doing it. So commission, omission, act or conduct, these 4 words are used. That's why I said that this definition is very exhaustive. These 4 words will show you that. Along with this, the various clauses are there in the definition: physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal or emotional abuse, economic abuse, etc. I have used this word etc. purposely because this is inclusive. The list is not exhaustive. This is inclusive. You can read this definition because we are not having much time to read, because I think 1 hour will take for explaining and for seeing or interpreting this section 3 only. That's why I am skipping the reading of this section 3. You can very well read it. So we will again go toward the first definition, that is aggrieved person. Aggrieved person means any woman who is or has been in a domestic relationship with the respondent. We have seen what is domestic relationship. We have seen what is respondent. Who alleges to have been subjected to any act of domestic violence by the respondent. So we have also dealt with the domestic violence definition. So what is domestic violence? So any woman who covers all these tests can file the application in a court of law under this act. There is a question before the Honorable Supreme Court that whether a woman who has, or whether the parties, spouses, who have obtained the decree of judicial separation, and whether they are covered, or whether the wife is covered within this definition of aggrieved person, or whether she can file a petition. See, there is difference between divorce and judicial separation. Divorce would sever the relationship between the parties. They are not more the husband and wife, not the spouses of each other once the decree of divorce is passed. Of course, from the date of the decree. So they are not the husband and wife from the date of decree in case of a divorce. But in case of judicial separation, only the residents would get separated from each other, but the legal relationship would remain the same as husband and wife. Therefore, what are the words used? Judicially separated. They are not separated in fact. So their legal status would be the husband and wife only. And therefore, it is explained by the Supreme Court that there is difference between divorce and judicial separation. And when the parties have judicially separated from each other, it would not restrain or prevent a woman to file a petition under Domestic Violence Act. Of course, the judge should see whether there is any domestic violence or not. I'm just talking about the entitlement. I'm not talking that when the petition is filed, she will get the reliefs or whatever. Basically, this whole act, this is very small act, but there is a huge scope for interpretation, and therefore different provisions have been interpreted by different courts, various high courts and Supreme Court differently. And therefore you will find different citations of two courts on the same point, because that would be based on the facts of that particular case, and the facts of case may differ from each other, and therefore of course the decision would be different. Therefore there cannot be any stereotype answer that this would be yes or the answer of this would be no. It cannot be like that, because it will totally depend upon the facts which are before you. In this case also, the Supreme Court has held that since the legal relationship between the parties or between the couple who has been judicially separated from each other would legally be the husband and wife, therefore the wife can very well file a petition under Domestic Violence Act. You may take down the citation also whenever it is there. I will share it with you. This is in case of Krishna Bhattacharya versus Sarathi Chaudhary. Krishna Bhattacharya versus Sarathi Chaudhary, 2016, Criminal Law Journal, page number 330, Supreme Court. Interestingly, you may find one authority of our parent High Court, Bombay High Court, in case of Sadhana versus Hemant, in which the Honorable Bombay High Court has come to a conclusion that if the wife has already been divorced, she cannot file a petition under Domestic Violence Act. Suppose the petition is pending for DV Act and also for a divorce, and the husband got divorced, but the DV petition is pending in the court, she is entitled. It is said by the Bombay High Court. It is not my view. I am sharing with the view which is expressed by the Honorable Bombay High Court. But when the facts of this case are that in 2008, the parties were separated from each other by a decree of divorce, and after that decree, in the year 2009, the wife filed a petition under Domestic Violence Act, but the Honorable High Court, it was dismissed by the Judicial Magistrate First Class. It was also dismissed, means magistrate's decision was confirmed by the Sessions Court, and therefore when the matter was before the Honorable High Court, the High Court has also taken the same view that since the parties have been already separated from each other by way of divorce, now thereafter the petition for domestic violence cannot be filed by the lady or the woman who is no more the wife of that man. That is the decision, or that is the view expressed by Honorable Bombay High Court in the case of Sadhana versus Hemant. It is decided on 18/4/2019. You may Google it, you may type the names and you will find the decision. That's why I told you that there are different decisions based on the different set of facts, and therefore we cannot express a particular view that this is yes or this is no, because the facts are different in every case. The important aspect, one more thing, that is whether the act has a retrospective operation or not, this Domestic Violence Act. I suppose that you are aware of this term retrospective and prospective. You must be knowing. In short, I will tell you. Retrospective means it would apply to the cases which are filed or which were filed even prior to passing of the act. Means this act has come into force in the year 2006. But if we say that this act has retrospective operation, then it would apply equally to the cases or equally to the incidents which are there, occurred prior to year 2006. If we say that this has retrospective operation. But if we say that this have prospective operation, then it would apply to the incidents which would take place after the year 2006. So this is difference between retrospective and prospective. Normally, the substantive laws means the laws which confer rights, which impose duties upon a person. Those are called substantive laws, or which deals with substantive rights and duties. Those are normally prospective in nature because that would directly hit your rights. Normally, the acts which deals with substantive rights, those are prospective in nature, but the procedural laws have retrospective operation also. This is the normal rule, what I am telling you. As far as this DV Act is concerned, we have already read the definition of aggrieved person, domestic relationship, what it shows. I have explained to you that the woman shall not be in a domestic relationship, necessarily be in a domestic relationship at the time of filing of the petition. Any past act is also covered. So if she had been with the respondent in a domestic relationship for a particular point of time, then also she can be said to be the aggrieved person. So these definitions of aggrieved person, domestic relationship would clearly show that this act has also retrospective operation. Means though it is passed in the 2006, the incidents or the acts of domestic violence which had taken place prior to 2006, those are also covered if the petition is filed, or those can also be covered and the petition can be filed. This is the scope, that is retrospective operation of the act. This is discussed in the by the Honorable Supreme Court in the authority of V.D. Bhanot, BHNOT versus Sarita Bhanot. You can take down the authorities right now, and in your leisure time you can read. That may be helpful for you at the time of your further career as a law graduate, as an advocate, or in your other area also. Those may be helpful to you. V.D. Bhanot versus Sarita Bhanot, reported in 2012, volume number 3, Supreme Court cases, page number 183. So this act has a retrospective operation. Then next important thing is, what is shared household? I'm not going to read the definition in whole because it is a very lengthy definition. This term is defined in section 2, subsection S of DV Act 2S. It deals with shared household. This is also exhaustive. The household, the premises where the aggrieved person was staying or had stayed or is staying with the respondent, is important as far as this shared household aspect is concerned. The question prior to few years was before the Honorable Supreme Court that whether the house which is in the name of the in-laws of the aggrieved person can be a shared household or not. That was the issue. If we would go by the definition of shared household, it clearly speaks that any household, whether the respondent or the applicant has any right, title, interest in it or not, whether it is owned or tenanted by her or him is not important. So though the husband is not having any right, any title, any interest in the household, but if he is staying in it for a considerable period with his wife or with the applicant, whatever it may be, but if he is staying there, then it would be the shared household of the parties. So if we go by the definition, then of course, though the house is owned by the in-laws, that may be their self-acquired property, but if she is staying there with the respondent, then as per definition, it would cover within the definition of shared household. But this shared household was interpreted by the Honorable Supreme Court differently in the case of S.R. Batra versus Taruna Batra. That is a very well-known authority. You must be knowing about it. The Supreme Court has held that the shared household would only mean the house belonging to or taken on rent by the husband, or the house which belongs to the joint family which the husband is the member. Means if it is a self-acquired property of the in-laws, it would not be the shared household that was discussed in the authority of S.R. Batra versus Taruna Batra. The law was continued till the last year as it is. No doubt there are few authorities of few high courts. I'm talking about our parent high court also. You may be knowing the authority of Roma Tiwari versus Rajesh Tiwari, in which Honorable Justice Dr. Shalini Phansalkar Joshi has interpreted it differently, that the matrimonial house concept she stressed upon. In that case, the situation was that the lady was staying with the in-laws and the husband in Mumbai itself for quite a long period, say for example 15 years almost. She was married, she came to Mumbai to stay with the husband, and they were staying in the flat which was owned by her father-in-law. But she came in the house, and for 15 years continuously she was staying there. She gave birth to 2 daughters there. And when there was dispute between them, what was the contention of the husband? this house is in the name of my father. It is his self-acquired property, and therefore this is not your shared household if we go by the authority of S.R. Batra. So where she would go now after 15 years when she is having two daughters? The daughters cannot live without the mother. So that was the situation before the Bombay High Court, in which Honorable Justice Shalini Phansalkar Joshi has very well explained or interpreted this term matrimonial house and said that this is her matrimonial house where her entry is lawful. See, when the entry is lawful, you cannot say that now your stay in that house would be unlawful. You can read that authority. It is very well discussed. Now recently, the Honorable Supreme Court also, in the case of Satish Chandra Ahuja versus Neha Ahuja, overruled the decision of S.R. Batra. So specifically the authority is referred and that is overruled. So you can read that authority also. But while explaining the term shared household, the Honorable Supreme Court has specifically mentioned that mere casual living at different places shall not make a shared household. Suppose the parties are staying for a short period at the house of relatives, at the house of friends, because this is discussed in S.R. Batra, that if we go by the definition, then if the parties would go to the house of uncle, to the house of mama, to the house of chacha, to the house of parents or any relatives and would stay there, that would be covered under definition of shared household. That is the view of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of S.R. Batra. And therefore, by specifically overruling S.R. Batra's authority, the care is taken by the Honorable Supreme Court that it should have the limited interpretation, this shared household. Living must have some permanency. Means for considerable period, for some permanent period, the parties should stay with each other in that particular premises. So a casual visit, casual living at different places would not be sufficient to say that that premises is the shared household. Of course, the discretion, what is permanent is left upon the wise discretion, we may say it is left upon the judges, what is permanent, what is temporary, whatever. But in short, though it is specifically overruled, this it is interpreted what should be the shared household. Intention of the parties and nature of living, including nature of household, relevant considerations for ascertaining whether parties treated premises as shared household. So intention of the party should be gathered by the courts while deciding whether that particular premises was a shared household or not. Intention of the parties is also important. The casual living shall not be there and some kind of permanency should be there to say that this is the shared household of the parties. So these are the aspects for this shared household. Sharat Chandra Ahuja versus Sneha Ahuja. It is 2021, very recent authority. Volume 1, Supreme Court Cases, page number 414. It is decided on 15th October 2020. Excuse me. About this, we will cover one aspect and thereafter we will move towards the reliefs part. The Act has covered not only the relationships of marriage, but also the relations in the nature of marriage. Live-in relationship, the term we normally use for it. The question is whether all live-in relationships are covered or not. The word live-in relationship is also interpreted or explained by the Honorable Supreme Court and various high courts also in various decisions. I will tell you only 2-3 important citations in which the Honorable Supreme Court has explained it. Those are D. Veluswamy versus Pachimal, 2010 Supreme Court, 2010 volume 10 Supreme Court cases, page number 469. So D. Veluswamy is one authority. Then in the case of Lalita Tapu versus State of Jharkhand, that is also the authority of Honorable Supreme Court. In the 2019 volume 13 Supreme Court cases, page number 796. Bombay High Court's authority is also there. Reshma Begum versus State of Maharashtra, Bombay High Court. But same thing is there, or same is the view. The question is whether all live-in relationships are covered or not. The Honorable Supreme Court has categorized it. What categories or what category of cases would be covered and what would not cover. So few tests are laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says that the parties must be in a position to enter into a valid marriage with each other. So the essential conditions of valid marriage will be applicable to them. It is not necessary that they should marry with each other, but their legal status would be that they would be capable to marry with each other. That would cover the legal age of marriage, 18, 21. If their age is below 18, then of course legally they would not be. Again, the other things, that is living spouse shall not be there. If the living spouse is there, then of course they would not be legally capable to marry with each other, and therefore their relationship, howsoever long it may be, that would not be covered in live-in relationship. One authority is there in which the parties have stayed together for a period of more than 15 to 20 years, live-in relationship. But when there was a dispute between them, and when the lady said that I have been staying with this man for a period of more than 15 years, so it is like a marriage only. But what the Honorable Supreme Court said, that you were knowing that he is already married, and therefore your position would not be like a live-in partner, and therefore you are not entitled for any relief under this act. That's why I use the term howsoever long relation may be there between the parties, but if they are not in a position to marry with each other legally, then their relationship will not be covered by the term live-in relations. So they should be they should qualify to enter into the marriage. And voluntary cohabitation for a considerable period of time should be there. Again, what is considerable period of time, that is left to the wise discretion of the court. Any specific years is not quoted, so it will depend upon the facts and circumstances of each case. Similarly, the couple must have hold themselves before the society as being akin to spouses. Means they are staying together, wandering here and there in the city, going for marketing, going for films, movies, shopping, for the functions at the houses of the relatives. Suppose marriage is there, they went together. Suppose any party is there, family gathering is there, they went together. So when the society looks towards them, society look toward that person and a lady as spouses of each other. That should be the relationship between them. It should be open. And they should treat each other as their partner. Again, for deciding the court live-in relationship, it will depend upon the facts, and here the talent of you people come. You will have to, if the case is of live-in partner, you will have to read these authorities, you will have to read these conditions, criteria which is laid down, and your pleading should be like that only. Otherwise, what will happen? You cannot lead evidence if the pleading is absent, or it may be dismissed at the threshold only by observing that the live-in relationship is not there. So it is important as an advocate for you to specifically plead about it by reading these authorities. In the case of Lalita Tapu and state of Jharkhand also, the same thing is discussed, that live-in partner would be entitled to reliefs under this act. That is about the woman in live-in relationship. While discussing the definition of respondent, I have told you that we will see it in detail later. So who is respondent? If we go by the definition as stand in the books, is any adult male member. However, that adult male words have been removed by the Honorable Supreme Court in the authority of Hiral Harsora versus Kusum Harsora, reported in 2019, volume 15, Supreme Court cases, page number 352. So now, what shall be the definition? The respondent means any member of the family with whom the aggrieved person is in domestic relationship. Previously, there was a question whether the female member would be covered in the term of respondent or not. But now it is very well answered in the authority of Hiral Harsora. You may also read the authority of Sandhya Wankhede also, in which it is discussed by the Honorable Supreme Court that the purpose of the Act is to provide for effective protection of the rights of women who are victims of violence of any kind occurring within the family. The classification of adult male person clearly subverts the doctrine of equality by restricting the reach of social beneficial statute meant to protect women against all forms of domestic violence. So the female is also included. So suppose the aggrieved person is the wife, she can join her husband as a respondent, she can join her mother-in-law, her father-in-law, her sister-in-law who is also a female. I am talking about who can be joined. I am not saying that join all these people or join all these persons. So they can be joined as respondents as per this definition of section 2Q. So the relief is also available against the female. At the same time, the Supreme Court has given a caution, word of caution, that when the wife is implicating one and all the family members in the petition, then the courts shall scrutinize the role played by each of them, or whether it is pleaded or not. So again, as an advocate, it is your skill that when you join the respondent, more than 1, 2, 3, whatever, you will have to specifically mention the role played by them. It shall not be a vague allegation or mere simple allegation that all of them subjected to domestic violence. Not necessary. it is not sufficient, especially when you are joining all of them as respondents. So it should be specifically written, because the duty is cast upon the court to see whether there is in fact any role played by the relatives, even at the threshold. If the court sees that there is no role and without any reason they are joined as respondents or parties, the court may deny to pass first orders against them. Court may strike off their names. Therefore, firstly, in fact, it is your responsibility as an advocate. See, we all are the one part and joined together in justice, this delivery of administration of justice. So it shall be the lookout as an advocate also to see that in fact who are the culprits, those only shall be joined. Otherwise, I have seen the petitions in which a minor, or we may say child of 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, those are also joined as respondents because the definition permits. So it shall not be like that. So it is my humble request to all of you that when you are drafting a petition, when you are joining the respondents as parties, please see whether in fact there any role played by them. Otherwise, see, I will give you a small example. A college going boy is there, 16 years, 17 years, college going boy, and domestic violence petition is filed against his brother, mother. So he is the brother-in-law of the aggrieved person. He is studying at some distant place, staying in a hostel. He is not staying in the shared household also, but still he is joined as a party. Not only in DV petition, but also in 498A IPC petition, IPC case, which is filed by that aggrieved person or that lady. What will happen? There is no role in fact played by that person, that boy, but his whole career would be destroyed because a false criminal case is lodged against him. So is it right on the part of advocates to join such person or such boy who has in fact no relationship in the petition? That's why I appeal you or request you to see and do not blindly join everybody as a party just because the applicant says so. Otherwise also no doubt the court will see. But if a criminal case is registered, it may hamper the whole career of a person. And that's why I am requesting you to please see whether in fact there is any role. Secondly, it is also necessary that a family shall not be destroyed. There are few cases in which the mediation or settlement is very possible, easily possible if it is done by the advocates, done by the counselors, done by the mediators. But it is not done at the first instance, and thereafter when the issue become large, when the egos become large, the matter is referred for the mediation or for the counseling, and at that time it would become very difficult to resolve it amicably. So when a case would come to you, don't say that this is my first case or how I shall settle it. Let it go in court, let the parties fight in the court. No, that shall not be the approach, especially in matrimonial litigations. Your approach shall first be towards settlement. Firstly, you will have to see whether settlement is possible. If not, then you can proceed further. I'm not saying that in each and every case you should try for settlement. There are few cases in which the violence is of such a grave nature that we cannot even think about settlement. Forget about those type of cases. I'm talking about the cases in which it is possible that the issue is very small it can be resolved in the initial stage. So it is my request to see those type of cases, because we are also having the social responsibility to build a society, and therefore you can see towards those matters. So this is all about who can be joined as a respondent. Wife cannot implicate one and all in the family. That is discussed by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Ashish Dikshit versus State of UP. The duty is cast upon the court while deciding the DV Act cases, that whether there is any role played by the respondent in each respondent. That is discussed in the by the Honorable Supreme Court in the authority of Krishna Bhattacharya versus Sarthi Chaudhary. I had already referred it. Vague allegations that respondents' family members have done it, or vague allegation is there, then the court will have to go slow, court will have to see, and even you will have to specifically draft it. If there is any role, then you will have to specifically draft it, so that the complaint or the petition would be tenable against that person. So this is all about respondents who can be joined and who cannot be. I think we have covered this definition portion. If you are having any doubts, then I will take a break of 2-3 minutes. If you are having any doubts, then you can post it in the chat box. I will see it and I will try to answer, because we are having just 30 minutes after this break would left to cover the remedies. So if you have, then please type it in the chat box. I will wait for 2 minutes. I can see only one question, which is put by Mahesh Krishna. Is there a similar law for protection of children against family violence? See, you must have heard about the POCSO Act, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. This will cover all types of violences against the children. So POCSO Act is the answer. That is specifically for children. Here also, if the child is a female child, if the child is a female child, then she can very well come in this POWDV Act also. Because initially only I told you that age is not the criteria. Any woman, when the term is used, aggrieved person can be any woman. So a woman, a minor below 18, or a child, if she is a female child, then also she can very well ask or claim the reliefs which are available in DV Act. Of course, she cannot herself file it. She will have to apply through next friend, by or guardian, legal guardian, etc. She can knock the doors of the court. But the reliefs are available to a child, female child specifically, and otherwise also the POCSO Act is there. that is available. The next question is, are there protection officers readily available in Maharashtra, or do you basically have to go to the court? Okay. I am coming to that point when we talk about the procedure. So thank you for asking this question, Mr. Mahesh. I will deal with that aspect also. One question is there by Shreyasi. If cause of action has occurred in a city A, petitioner and respondent also live in the similar city, same city, then can a case be filed in a different state or city where petitioner's parents live? Okay. Again, we are coming to the jurisdiction aspect also. I will cover that there. Please ask question regarding the terms or the definitions which we have already covered. I will be covering these both aspects regarding protection officer and regarding jurisdiction also. We will proceed further. If you have any query, then you can put it in the chat box. What reliefs can be claimed under the POWDV Act? As told by me, there are various reliefs, many reliefs, n number of reliefs, which can be claimed by the aggrieved person. Though the Act has specified it in section 18 to 21, 22, 21 custody. So 18 to 21 sections deals with this relief portion. We are not going to read each and every section. I will read only the head note or title of the section. Section 18 is protection order. Section 19 residence order. Section 20 monetary relief. So various types of reliefs regarding money are covered. And section 21 custody orders and 22 compensation orders. So these 5 types of reliefs are covered, but if you will read it, the sections, you will get to know that these are not only the 4-5 sections, but n number of reliefs can be claimed and are covered under this act. Many a times a question is asked or question may struck to your mind that whether a domestic violence act is civil in nature or it is criminal in nature. When I ask this question to the students who come here, most of them answer that it is criminal in nature, because the jurisdiction is with the judicial magistrate first class, which is the criminal court, and therefore it is criminal in nature. But if you will read these sections 18 to 21, the reliefs which are governed, you will clearly come to know that all these reliefs are clearly civil in nature. See, these protection orders, what it said that protection order in favor of aggrieved person prohibit the respondent from doing certain things. So this is prohibitory reliefs, means in the nature of injunctions to do a particular thing or not to do a particular thing. Many things are covered: not entering into the place of employment of the aggrieved person, not communicating with her in any way. It may be by mobiles also, or chasing also. So physically communicating, electronically communicating, or in any way not to communicate. not to alienate the assets, not to alienate the stridhan, not to visit to the place of education or school, not to visit to the school of the child, etc. So all these and many such reliefs are covered in this section 18 protection order. So it is in the nature of preventive relief. That this prevents the respondent from doing a particular course of action. So like injunction, clearly civil remedy. Residence orders, this is regarding providing residence to the aggrieved person. So how it should be provided, when it should be provided, we are going to deal with that also. But this is also civil in nature. Custody orders, monetary reliefs, compensation. In compensation, when we say that it is a tort, civil wrong for which we can claim compensation. So in short, though the jurisdiction is vested with the magistrate, this act is civil in nature and not a criminal, except section 31. Section 31 only speaks about the penalty for breach of protection orders. So only section 31 is the penal section, which in fact we say that it is the function of the criminal code to punish the criminal. So exception 31, if we see the whole terminology of the act, it is civil in nature. The next question regarding procedure is whether amendment in pleadings is permissible or not. Just now I told you that this is civil in nature, pleadings are there. How we record the evidence? Like 125 CRPC, that is quasi-civil in nature. We file the affidavit, we examine the witnesses, chief cross exhibiting the documents. So whole procedure of CPC we apply for proving your case. Then why not order 6 rule 17? Therefore, amendment in pleadings is also permissible, legal in DVA petitions, considering the nature of the act. As far as residence orders are concerned, this again you will have to look towards the definition of shared household. You will have to see whether she is aggrieved person and whether there was domestic relationship, whether they have shared household, and thereafter the residence orders can be given. While filing an application for residence order, in few cases residence in the same household is claimed by the applicant. Means suppose they are staying in 2-bedroom kitchen house, 2 BHK flat. She may claim that I want 1 room or 1 bedroom which is having attached toilet bathroom which she can use for exclusive use of herself. If she is having any child, then me and my child. That type of reliefs you can claim. Means protecting her stay in the same household where she is staying with the respondents. That can be claimed. This section specifically gives a remedy to the aggrieved person by which she can pray that the respondent or her husband shall be restrained from entering into the house. It can be partial restrictions or total. Partial means not entering into the particular area which is in the possession of the aggrieved person. Like I told you right now that she is claiming only 1 bedroom in the shared household. She may claim that the husband or the other persons shall not enter into the portion which is in my exclusive possession. That type of partial restriction. Or totally she can say that the husband shall not enter into the whole house. That type of application also can be filed. The court will see the necessity and the court will pass the order. But that relief is available to the aggrieved person regarding total restraint of the husband in the house. But always keep in mind that removal from the house, the remedy can be passed against the husband or any male, but it cannot be claimed against any female member. For example, the aggrieved person is staying in the shared household with her husband and with her mother-in-law. She can file an application saying that the husband shall not enter into the house, total house. But she cannot claim same relief against the mother-in-law because she is a lady. Section 19, though specifically provides that directing the respondent to remove himself from the shared household or restraining the respondent or any of his relatives from entering any portion of the shared household in which the aggrieved person resides. So that remedy she can claim, but what is the proviso? Provided that no order under clause B shall be passed against a person who is a woman. So what is B? Directing the respondent to remove himself from the shared household. So that remedy regarding total removal from the house is not available against a female member. It is available against the male member, totally. But partial restriction is available against the mother-in-law also and against the husband also. So this is about residence. Similarly, alternate accommodation can also be claimed under this residence orders. While drafting the alternate accommodation application, you will have to specifically mention the standard of living and what is the accommodation where she is presently staying, because it shall be of a same level. Means if she is living in a lavish house, a small house having no facilities cannot be provided to her as an alternate accommodation, and vice versa. Means if she is staying in a small house, she cannot claim a lavish house. Of course, it will again depend upon the facts. It will depend upon the economic condition of the respondent as well. Many factors are involved, but what the section says that alternate accommodation can be claimed and it shall be of the same level. So how the same level can be gathered? You will have to specifically mention it in your pleadings, in your application. So that is important. Then only the court will come to know what is same level. The question is whether the respondent himself can be totally removed. It is discussed by the Honorable Bombay High Court in the case of Sabita Burgess versus Mark Burgess. And see the wordings of the Honorable High Court. It is said that no matter a man alone may own a particular house, he has no right to be violent against his wife. If the court sees any violence, he must be restrained from entering upon the residence, essentially to secure the wife and children against further violence and similar disputes. So he cannot say that I am the owner, I am the exclusive owner, and how I am prevented from entering into the house. No. So what the Bombay High Court has said, that no matter a man alone may own the particular house, but it does not give him a right to be violent against his wife and children. So right of owning a particular thing is different and committing the acts of violence against the wife is different. And if he is doing this, then though he is the owner, he can be prevented from entering into the house. That is the words used by Honorable Bombay High Court, and it is also discussed in section 19 of DV Act also. So in short, that types of reliefs can be claimed. Monetary reliefs. In monetary reliefs in section 20, many reliefs or many for 2-3 categories reliefs can be claimed, but mostly I have seen that the reliefs in this section 20 are for maintenance only. Again, the question of maintenance is such a tricky question. To whom it shall be granted, who can claim, whether a educated wife can claim, what should be the criteria for claiming, for granting, various types. So a separate 1 or 2 hours lecture is necessary for only this maintenance aspect. Here I would only say that mere having education would not disentitle the wife from claiming maintenance. Though the wife is educated, she can claim maintenance. Of course, it will depend upon the facts of the case. What is important is to see that whether she is dependent and whether she has any source of income. So having education but without any source of income would entitle her to claim maintenance. Of course, it will depend whether she is purposely sitting at home or whether the job is available and despite that she is not doing it, etc., etc. Or in few cases I have seen that at the time of filing of the petition, the wife is doing a job, but when the application for maintenance is filed, what the advocate says that no, now she is not doing the job or she has been dismissed from the job. God knows what is the truth, or you advocates knows is better. But that is in case of male also. At the time of filing of the petition, they have the job, but during the pendency of the petition, they lost their job. Whatever. That's why I said this maintenance is a crucial aspect, and commenting upon it would be it would be like a blanket order, because the facts will play a major role in deciding whether the wife is entitled for maintenance and how much maintenance shall be granted, etc., etc. So all these aspects. Maintenance is a very tricky issue, I may say. But in short, maintenance can be claimed under this monetary reliefs part. Section 21 deals with custody orders. This will be a temporary custody which is covered by POW-DV Act, and one more important thing is that it can be claimed only by the aggrieved person. Means suppose the child is with the husband or with the respondent, then the aggrieved person can claim the custody. It cannot be vice versa. Means the child is with the aggrieved person and respondent is claiming the custody. No, it cannot be, because the section says that the reliefs under this section can be claimed only by the aggrieved person. Then what is the remedy that lies with the respondent? The respondent can claim for visitation rights, and again the discretion is left with the court. The court can allow the visitation rights, or if the court thinks that it would not be in the interest of the child, it may hamper the safety of the child, then even the court can reject it. But normally it is allowed, considering that the welfare of the child is of paramount importance. Normally it is not rejected, but again depending upon the facts. Important is that only the custody can be claimed under this act by the aggrieved person, and that is also for a temporary period till deciding the custody application by a competent court. So magistrate's court is not the competent court to decide the question of custody. It will temporarily grant the custody to the aggrieved person if the situation demands. In compensation orders, section 22, for claiming compensation, if there is any mental torture, emotional distress is caused by the acts of respondent, any injuries are there, then for that purpose, compensation can be claimed under the separate head as per this section 22. But I have seen very less cases in which compensation is claimed. Rather, specific evidence is on the record in support of this compensation. It is claimed in many cases, 25 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 50 lakhs, whatever. But there is no evidence as to the injuries or the mental torture or the emotional distress specifically. You would say that in every case there would be mental torture, no doubt. When we say that she is an aggrieved person, she is subjected to domestic violence, there is mental torture or there is mental injury to her, and that's why she is before the court. But for granting compensation under section 22, any special damages should be proved. That because of the act, this thing happened. There may be loss of opportunity. There may be some injuries. So that should be specifically proved, and then only under this head of compensation under section 22, the aggrieved person is entitled for the relief. There was one question regarding protection officers, that whether they are easily available or not, or the applicants directly come in the court. The answer is yes, in few cases they are easily available, just like Mumbai. In Mumbai, the jurisdiction lies with metropolitan magistrates, in which the protection officers take major part in the litigation. They come in the court and they help the aggrieved person in proceeding with the matter. So they are available in cities like Mumbai. But there are few cases, or in most of the parts of Maharashtra, they are not easily available, and the parties would prefer to directly come in the court. The domestic incident report is also one of the important consideration for the magistrate to pass the first order, because the act says that the domestic incident report should be there, and after going through it, the magistrate shall pass the first orders. But again, there is practical difficulty. If the applicants come to the you means before the court directly without going to the protection officer, and though the order of domestic incident report is passed regarding calling it, that would not come in the court. But it is not necessary for the court to wait till the receipt of domestic incident report. The magistrate can very well proceed further even in the absence of domestic violence, domestic incident report. So it is for the magistrate to look into this aspect. This is about the procedure. Section 26 also important, reliefs in other suits and legal proceedings. So though a relief can be claimed under section 12 in the main petition before the magistrate, simultaneously that can be claimed before the other courts, criminal courts, civil courts and family court also. Means suppose interim maintenance application is filed before the magistrate court, it is not that it shall not be filed before the family court if a divorce petition is pending. It can be filed, but while deciding it, the courts will have to see whether there is any other order of maintenance already filed or already it is passed, and by taking into account that, the next orders would be passed. Suppose there are 2-3 orders of maintenance, there may be. As an advocate, you must be very well knowing that under 125 CRPC also maintenance is there, under DV also it is there. Before it is in senior division court also it may be there, or even family court it may be there. So 3-4 orders, even at different places also it is there, because the jurisdiction may also lie at different places. So what should do? Whether the husband should pay all the maintenance When it is not possible, it would go beyond his capacity. Then there you may find various authorities of our parent High Court and Supreme Court also to club the various orders of maintenance. Suppose there are 3 orders, then that can be clubbed. Even if the money is deposited in different courts, then that also can be clubbed, or that can also can be deducted from the whole amount due from the respondent. So it is not like that the respondent is seen as an accused and against him the whole orders are passed. It is not like that. So he is also having the rights to file the application claiming that I am paying maintenance at different places. The court will look into it, and court will of course take into account the money deposited by the respondent in various courts. You may find various authorities also about it, that different orders of maintenance what to do. About jurisdiction, one question was put. Section 27 of the DV Act speaks about the jurisdiction. See what section 27 says: the court of judicial magistrate first class or metropolitan magistrate at the case may be within the limits of which the person aggrieved permanently or temporarily resides or carries on business or is employed, or the respondent resides or carries on business or is employed, or cause of action has arisen, shall be the competent court to grant protection order and other orders under the Act and to try offence under the Act. The order made under this Act shall be enforceable throughout India. So basically it covers 3 categories wherein the petition can be filed. First category is where the aggrieved person resides. The residence may be temporary or permanent. Means firstly, the aggrieved person, her residence, temporary, permanent, or business or employment. Means where she is staying. Suppose she is staying in Pune for temporary period for her job. She can very well file the application there because it is her city of residence city. Second category is respondent's city, means where the respondent is staying or carrying on business or employment. Both things are covered: applicant's stay, respondent's stay or employment, and thirdly, where the cause of action has arisen. So it is possible that the parties have stayed together in Pune. Thereafter, the husband shifts at a different place. The wife also went there. There they stayed for a considerable period, suppose for 2 years, and thereafter there was dispute between them, and the wife again comes back to Pune, the original place, and the husband went to some other place. So this middle place where they have stayed for a considerable period, suppose for 1 year, that place will also be covered for filing the petition because the part cause of action has occurred there. So that place is also covered. The question was, the husband resides at A place, wife resides at B place, and wife's parents are residing at some different place, and whether that different place where parents are staying, whether the petition can be filed there. So answer is, if the parties have stayed there also, and if part cause of action has occurred at the place, matrimonial place of the wife where her parents are living, then only that place would get the proper place of jurisdiction where the petition can be filed. If there is no cause of action, then the petition cannot be filed there. So these 3 categories are covered in this section 27. Section 27(2) is the soul of this act, that any order made under this act shall be enforceable throughout India. So suppose the order is passed by Pune court, it may be enforceable even at the any part of India. It may be UP, it may be Delhi, it may be even Kerala. So towards north, south, east, west, at any place it is enforceable. So for that, jurisdiction is not important for enforcement. It can be enforced throughout India. So this is the beauty of this act, how much wide protection is given to a aggrieved person by this act. I think I have covered many things which were possible in this 2 hours. I will see the chat. If there are any questions, then I will try to finish it. See, one question is there: if the petitioner dies during pendency of the act, a pendency of the case, or when she died due to injuries because of domestic violence and case is filed by her parents after her death, can her parents get custody of children under section 21? Okay. See, right now I told you that section 21, in which only the aggrieved person can claim, and this is a temporary custody, friends. This is not about the permanent custody. So if the aggrieved person is no more, then her parents will have to approach to a competent court for deciding the issue of custody. That cannot be decided under section 21 of DV Act, because the parents are not aggrieved person. They have not shared any domestic relationship with the respondent, because you will have to see whether they are covered in the definition of aggrieved person, and then only the next reliefs are available. The reliefs are not available to anybody who is not the aggrieved person. Therefore, that thing is important. The parents will have to seek to the proper court having jurisdiction regarding custody. They cannot seek the help of Domestic Violence Act. Okay, the question is, under the jurisdiction part, can the order be enforceable outside India? If yes, then how? See, what is written: any order made under this act shall be enforceable throughout India. It has not given the extraterritorial operation outside India. It is available. Section itself says 27 that it is enforceable within India.
एक आहे मॅडम.
काही क्वेरीज आहेत शिल्लक?
नाही, वर आहे, एक आहे.
वर आहे, बघते. कॉज ऑफ ऍक्शन झाली नाही.
नाही, सिस्टर इन लॉ. द सिस्टर इन लॉ.
ओके, बघते मी. Protection officer I have covered. If a cause of action has occurred in a city A, petitioner lives in the same city. I have covered this.
त्याच्या खाली.
त्याच्या खाली आहे. बघते.
Whether sister in law.
See more. नाही दिसत आहे काही मला.
अच्छा. त्यांनी विचारले सिस्टर इन लॉ ला रिस्पॉन्डंट करू शकतो का?
Sister-in-law respond, yes, she can be covered. If any cause of action is available against sister-in-law, she can be covered. Any female relative of the respondent can be. हा इथे दिसतोय आरती म्हणून ना. Yes, does sister-in-law's family. Okay, sister-in-law's family can be covered under the respondent. Sister-in-law's family means her in-laws. If you want to ask, then they do not share, I think, any domestic relationship with the aggrieved person. If there is any domestic relationship, they have shared any shared household, then only they would be covered. Therefore, I told you that the definition of aggrieved person cannot be read singly. The other terms which are used there: respondent, domestic relationship, and shared household, and then aggrieved person. So the combination of all these definitions would make a particular person to be an aggrieved person. And therefore, you will have to see whether any domestic relationship is there, whether they have shared any shared household, and then only we can say that whether they can be added in the array of respondents. But prima facie, I would say that they would not be joined. They cannot be joined. Her family members, sister-in-law's family members. ओके, संपले क्वेश्चन काही आहेत का थोरात साहेब?
आहे, लास्टला एक आलाय मॅडम. फॉर सिव्हिल रेमेडी लॉ.
हा, एक दिसतोय. Okay, for civil remedy there is civil law limitation is applicable? Should it apply to DV Act to prevent of its misuse? Please enlighten on this. Okay. Specific section is there in the DV Act, section 25. You may go, you may read Ms. Leena Kale. Section 25 specifically says about duration and alteration of the orders. Subsection 1 is protection order made under section 18, which you have specifically read about preventing a misuse, means protection order, section 18, shall be in force till the aggrieved person applies for discharge. If the magistrate on the receipt of the application from the aggrieved person or the respondent is satisfied that there is change in circumstances requiring alteration, modification, revocation of any order made under the Act, he may, for reasons to be recorded in writing, pass such order as he may deem it appropriate. So, it will remain in force until it is specifically applied by the applicant or even by the respondent for discharge. Otherwise, it will remain in force. And therefore, if the respondent thinks that now it is not useful or now it is not necessary, or even the applicant think that now the purpose is over, then she can file application, or even the respondent can file application. And what the magistrate would see, change in circumstances. So whether there is any need for protection or whether discharging would be necessary, that the magistrate would see, and thereafter the order would be passed. Otherwise, it would remain in force till discharge. Section 25 you may read. Section 28. Section 28 is regarding procedure. Section 28(2) says that the magistrate can lay down its own procedure. But normally, as I have told you already, that the procedure of filing affidavits, evidence affidavits, proving the documents is preferred by the courts, just like we deal with the petition filed under section 125 of CRPC. Normally that procedure is followed. Why that is followed? You may go to the rules. In the rules section, DV rules are also there, domestic violence rules. So in rules, if you will read rule 6, then subsection 5, sub rule 5, the application under section 12 shall be dealt with and the orders enforced in the same manner laid down under section 125 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. That's why I said that normally we use the procedure which is there under section, which we use for section 125. And appeal is preferred in the sessions court within 30 days from the date of order or judgment. Appeal is to the sessions court if the order of magistrate you are going to challenge. But if the application is decided, any specific relief is granted by the family court, then it would go to the Honorable High Court. Again, 30 days limitation is there. That is about the procedure and appeals. One question is that I think the question is whether there is a law of limitation of a couple is separated for 20 years. Can the woman file a petition under the Act for the acts during the time they live together? I have referred the authority of even Bombay High Court, in which the Bombay High Court has discussed what to see if they have been separated earlier. Then they will have to see whether there is any domestic relationship between them, whether there is any cause of action. And all these things would be seen if the parties have separated for 20 years and now she is filing the petition. So it will depend upon the facts, but normally after 20 years, it would be difficult to believe that, or it would be difficult to say that any domestic violence is there, whether she can file the application. I will take the last question now because it is already 1. In the absence of protection officer's report, can magistrate pass the final order? Yes. I think I have discussed this aspect also, that protection officers are not available at all places easily. Therefore, protection officers, or even in the absence of domestic incident report, the magistrate can proceed. Rather, the magistrate shall proceed. The magistrate shall not wait for the reports, and magistrate shall proceed with the case and pass the interim and even final orders also. I think सगळे क्वेश्चन संपले ना थोरात सर?
हो मॅडम, नाही आता काही.
Oh, thank you. So thanks a lot for the questions and your participation in this session on Domestic Violence Act. Thank you very much.
मॅडम 2 वाजताचं सेशनचं एक सांगायचं होतं.
आपण 4 मिनिटं.